Welcome to the Landon Pearson Resource Center for the Study of Childhood and Children's Rights. I'm Landon Pearson. This is my collection. Basically, this is my collection that represents a lifelong engagement with children and youth that covered many aspects of my rather long and interesting life, both in other countries, other parts of the world, and here in Canada, where I've been involved in issues related to children and youth all this long time. Over those years, I collected materials of various sorts, and when I came to leave the Senate at the age of 75, when I had to leave the Senate, I had a great many boxes of materials, and I didn't want to take them back and put them in my basement, and my husband did not want me to take them back and put them in my basement. And some friends at Carleton said, well, why don't you come and bring them to Carleton, and why don't you come with them, and you can be the added resource that goes with all your materials. So this is basically how the collection was brought together. But in order to make it really useful for everybody, it's been organized in a variety of ways. And the materials continue to grow. I continue to acquire probably 10 to 15 items a week. There are many departments in the government which are now closing their libraries, and those materials are coming to reside here. And I have many other sources, owing to a wide network of people involved in children and youth issues and organizations, including some work that kids themselves bring to me. So I'd like to describe the collection so that anyone who's interested, students and others, will know what's here and what they might like to pursue in case they're doing a paper or making a presentation or doing some research, because the materials are unique. They do exist. Some of them exist elsewhere, but none of them exist altogether, and altogether in the way that I've been able to put them together. So the first part of the collection, which is what I'll describe now, is called the Landon Pearson Center Collection on the History of Children's Rights. And that's the part of the collection for which there's already a finder's guide that represents all the work I've done over many long years related to children's rights and to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And in that collection, starting with the International Year of the Child, which was 1979, where I was the vice chair of the Canadian Commission for the International Year of the Child and the editor of the report that we did called For Canada's Children, a National Agenda for Action, was my first foray really into the understanding of the degree to which politics, the society at large, affect the way in which children grow and thrive. And that was the opportunity both to learn from the children themselves, but also from others who spoke about them. And so I have a large, collection of materials from that period. And the International Year of the Child was structured around the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of the Child, which had been developed in 1959 as a part of the Human Rights Declaration, the UN Declaration of Human Rights. But it was a declaration, and it wasn't something that you could do more. It was really good ideas. So at 1979, the decision was taken to make a convention on the rights of the child. And so I was involved and have been involved with the Convention on the Rights of the Child since that time. And I have collected materials related to that and to my activities with respect to that. So anyone who's interested in the many conferences, the many opportunities and gatherings that brought the language of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child to life, I have materials related to all of those. From Beijing, the conference in Beijing on women, which had a special section on children, and so on. And in a way, all this collection represents the evolution of and growth of language, development of language, which describes the role of children, or the status of children in the international society, both at home and abroad. And I had a particular opportunity at the end of in 1989, when the convention was ratified, was adopted by the United Nations. I had up to then been chairing something called the Canadian the Canadian Council on Children and Youth. And we decided to form a coalition with many other children's organizations in order to promote the convention in Canada and to make sure that we ratified. And in 1990, in September 1990, Canada took a major role in the World Summit on Children. Our then Prime Minister Brian Mulroney was the co-chair. Canada was one of the initiating countries for that summit, which brought together world leaders for the very first time, world leaders to talk about children and the status of children. And we were able to, from the coalition, which I had then formed, we were able to bring children, a child in particular, who was chosen by her peers to represent them at this convention, at the summit. And she was the only one who was there who'd been chosen by her peers. So, and she was very, very effective, very conscientious. I was glad to be able to go as her companion and chaperone in New York. But out of the World Summit came many documents, which I have in my collection here, and they were important too because there was a declaration and plan of action from the World Summit. The next thing that happened to me is I worked on issues related to children with the Canadian Coalition on Children and Youth, and we got a bit frustrated, and I thought, the next move is going to be a political one, and much to my surprise, I was the one that made the political move. And I was appointed to the Senate in 1994 by Prime Minister Jean Chrétien as a representative of those who have no vote. Technically, I represented Ontario, but everybody else represented Ontario, so that's what he told me. It was, when he appointed me, I was to speak for children and to enable children to speak. And so for the 11 years that I was in the Senate, I continued both internationally and domestically to work on children's issues, and all of those activities are documented in my center and fully documented, including the meetings in Beijing, the meeting in Stockholm for the first Congress against the World Congress against the Sexual Exploitation of Children, meetings in Oslo and elsewhere on child labor, a meeting in Winnipeg on child soldiers. Many meetings took place during that decade, which was a really open window for children and for children's rights. And the language evolved, and people understood the status of children better. And many countries now had ratified the convention. In fact, every country has ratified the convention except the United States and Somalia. And that remains the case now. All other countries have ratified it. And we all have to make reports to the international community in Geneva with respect to how we're implementing the convention. And I led our delegation in 2002. But the reason I was so involved internationally was because of my background in the Foreign Service. My husband was a diplomat. I became involved. I was appointed as advisor on children's rights to Oid Axworthy, who was then the foreign minister, and then subsequently to three succeeding foreign ministers. And I was enabled, therefore, to take Canada's position and work and enable Canada to be seen widely as a supporter of children's rights. And all of that is documented in this collection. Then I was appointed by Prime Minister Chrétien to be his special representative to the Special Session on Children of the United Nations, which took place in 2002, which was therefore more than 10 years after the World Summit, but it was to look back at the World Summit and how much we achieved. And that was a fascinating experience. It required a lot of preliminary work. Canada took a very strong position thanks to the support from Mr. Chrétien, who was, again, Canada was one of the initiating countries for this adventure. And Mr. Chrétien agreed with me that youth participation should be a primary primary goal for our activities there. And so my documentation on the special session on children is extremely is extensive, and not only from what we did in Canada, but also what other countries did and the positions they took and all the kind of dialogue that went on and so on and so forth. And we took kids on our delegation, much to the surprise of UN authorities who said, "What are they doing here?" And we said, "Well, why not? I mean, this is about children." And of course, they soon discovered that they made more sense than many of the adults who were speaking from the floor. They could speak briefly and succinctly and well. And we had, over that time, we had 6 young people who came in succession, 2 at a time, to be on our delegation for the various meetings. And after that, thanks to Mr. Chrétien's support, I was given the job of supervising Canada's response to the national the special session. Each country was asked to develop a plan of action. So the plan of action from the special session was called A World Fit for Children, and the plan of action for Canada we called A Canada Fit for Children. And I have a great deal of documentation related to that because there was wide consultation with non-governmental organizations, with officials, with kids, and so on in the preparation of that document. So it represented a voice from that time of basically what should be done. Also, when I was in the Senate, I worked on domestic issues. In particular, I was on the Legal and Constitutional Affairs, so I sponsored every piece of legislation related to children, the Youth Criminal Justice Act, the various acts on child protection, and so on. My final act in the Senate was as the co-chair, the deputy chair of the Human Rights Committee, where we did a study of Canada's implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, called Who's in Charge here, on the understanding that, in fact, Canada's been slow to do what it should be doing with respect to children. So all of that is documented, many of the submissions, the materials, the reports, and so on and so forth. And probably the one other that's worth talking about is the custody and access. I co-chaired the Joint Parliamentary Committee on child custody and access, which was a powerful experience, and where we went all across the country to hear from many witnesses, aggrieved fathers, angry mothers, experts, various kinds, lawyers, judges, and so on and so forth. And we produced a report called For the Sake of the Children, to try to remind all separating and divorcing parents that the thing that they really had to think about was the children themselves and what was in their best interests. So then I turned 75 and I had to leave the Senate and required retirement. And I came here, and since I've been here, I've continued as much as possible, the work I've been doing, and that's also documented in this particular section. We have all the meetings and the workshops we've had with kids, and the workshops we've had with child rights academics, and other materials that I've written for UNICEF and so on, is all again in this collection, and it is continuing to grow because we're continuing to be active.